Hello, welcome to the program Spiritism Inspiring Lives. Today's reflections will be about envy, and we may start to reflect about ourselves. Who are we? If everyone asks who I am, from which perspective I am initiated this reflection. It's important to understand that we all are spirits, souls in evolution, in progress, on the journey of self-growth, self-enlightenment. As immortal beings as we are, constantly we are learning, adding more knowledge, as we are expanding our ability to meditate, to reflect about ourselves within the greatest process of self-knowledge, that we are deepening within ourselves with honesty, with love, and also with inner power to change whatever needs to be changed in case there is or are some aspects. As today's reflections are based on envy, and I'm aware that they are very brief reflections, and yet they can be very profound if we take the time to meditate, to analyze, to reflect, and to process our own thinking. We may start by asking, as a conscious in evolution, as a soul in progress, do I think that I may have elements of envy? Do I think that I'm aware of them or not? Together here in these couple of moments, we will present some points that perhaps can help us all, because the aim is to get to know ourselves, who we are, so that we can really identify eventual elements of envy and also at the same time have the resources to heal them. In the book by Joana de Angelis, Spirit, Happy Life, she says, I quote, "Envy is a great enemy that you need to fight in your intimate world." It is important here to understand envy is a great enemy, meaning, translating it in order for us to understand, is a great shadow, is a great shortcoming, is a great imperfection of the soul, which us who are reincarnated are expressing ourselves through the physical body, but it is a psychological, emotional tendency that we bring within our unconscious memories. That you need us, she's referring to us. Joana de Angelis, for those who don't know, is a spiritual benefactor who is helping humanity to increase self-awareness within a holistic perspective, within a transpersonal psychological perspective. And then she says, you need to fight in your intimate world. Fight means that we need to become aware, in case we are dealing with envy, become aware of it, become aware how it manifests within ourselves, in which situations, what are the triggers, so that we can work it, we can process it. Fight means to be aware of the unconscious, limited, negative systems that run in the automatic way, and on the conscious level, at the same time, also to have a goal, how we are aiming now to heal ourselves from that shortcoming, so that we can relate with the shortcoming at the same time, based on the mind or the memory of our inner wisdom that interprets it in a different way. Because envy, when Joana de Angelis is inviting us to fight it, means to tackle it, means to overcome it in new ways of being, new ways of thinking. And above all, when we talk about envy in a very brief way, it has to do with low self-esteem. It has to do with lack of self-worth. It has to do with inferior complex. It has to do with our immaturity in terms of our own individuality as immortal beings essentially of love, which still are in a very, let's say, underdeveloped stage in our journey. And as more as we study about ourselves, learn to relate with our inferiorities and transcend them in new ways of thinking, that above all, we are all loving beings in essence. We also carry the divine power within ourselves, and we can change our inferior references that somewhere in our journey, in these existences, or in this existence or in other existences, now, which is the best moment in all, we can choose to override that, as long as we address these limited references that we bring ourselves. Because when we do that process in our internal world, meaning in our internal psychological, emotional, spiritual perspective, we are the authors of these efforts that we put in, and at the same time imprinting in our unconscious memory or in our perispirit the new choices, the new ways of thinking that we are valuable human beings since we have been created by God. In essence, we have these elements, yet they need to be stimulated by us. And as we move forward, it's still in the book Happy Life by the Spirit Zwirtes Angels. She says, I quote, envy becomes cruel in the mental creation and unbalances emotions. Zwirtes Angels is always helping us from a very broader perspective that we are immortal beings, that we essentially are psychological and emotional beings, that we are spirits, and we carry all the power to transform ourselves, to actualize ourselves within. So she is saying envy becomes cruel in a sense of primitiveness, of inferior tendencies that we may bring within in the mental creation. What is she referring here to help us to think for ourselves? It's very important that we all learn to think for ourselves. And do you know that we all bring within ourselves the natural laws of God, the natural laws in the universe? Yes, we do. So when the benefactor says, becomes cruel in the mental creation, very attentive, all of us, learn to think and observe what we are thinking. Because mental creation in a cruel way means in a very brutal way, in a very primitive way, is referring to our limited negative belief systems, thoughts that is running or are running in our unconscious minds. And that impacts our emotion dimension that we refer to, which are unbalanced. We cannot be centered. We cannot be healthy mentally, emotionally, when we deal about envy. As we mentioned previously, that comes from a very abundant inner place that we neglected, that we rejected, that we haven't embraced yet. But we can all choose to do that in any moment as long as we wish to do so. And then she carries on presenting us the following in the same book, and I quote, envy becomes a merciless inspector and an insensitive supervisor. Here again, bear in mind the greatest proposal of self-knowledge so that we can favor self-encounter, favoring also the self-transformation or the self-healing or the self-spiritual growth that we are allowing ourselves. It's almost like, as I referred to previously, envy comes from a place of self-abandonment, of self-rejection, and therefore inferior complex, low self-esteem, lack of self-worth. Self-worth has nothing to do with money, has nothing to do with what people may think about us. People will think whatever they want to in their stage of evolution, and we are asked to accept that. And healthy psychological people do accept, but do not allow to be contaminated by other people's minds. And also inspect is almost like observing everyone. Did we ever experience envy in our existences? When we analyze our own internal behavior, we see that we are agitated, we are nervous, we are insecure, we cannot trust others, we are always vigilant or always inspecting other behaviors. These days, currently, would say, I always watch the other's telephone, I cannot trust wherever the other goes, I always think that the other is unfaithful, and so on and so forth. Pay attention. Those are internal limited references, unhealthy. Once we learn to supervise ourselves, once we learn to inspect our own reality from the self level onwards, choosing to correct our own shortcomings, choosing to learn to control ourselves, choosing to trust ourselves from the self level onwards, from the truth level onwards, then we accept other people as they are, even meaning their shortcomings. But we always take the responsibility, which is the internal autonomy, to override our own limitations. And we have the ability in any moment, as long as we are aware, to change our thoughts, to change our belief system, because every experience starts from our mental state. As Joana de Anjos mentioned previously, the mental creation, hopefully we are choosing to develop a healthy, creative mentality. And for that to happen, I need to study myself, analyze myself, meditate about. I also need to study about mind reality as an immortal being, as a spirit, as the constant process of growing, of healing, of willing to override my own pride and selfishness, which may be holding back. And it's more as I hold back on those old vices, less I trust in myself. But as more as I choose to be humble, to be sincere, to be honest with my own relationship with myself in relation to the external world, we are always carrying the references, the consequences of our own choices internally, even if they are not externalized. So it's fundamental to think about and also to invest in our inner peace. Inner peace does not mean that I do what I want. That is rebelliousness. That is this stupidity, that we are increasing our low self-esteem, or inferior complex, or internal insecurities, and therefore we walk around in the world projecting that in those others. Is very important. And if you move on here with still the benefactor, Joana de Anjos in the book Happy Life, I quote, she says, envy sets traps, takes revenge through thought, word, and action, and pursues relentlessly. This is very important in these brief reflections. Envy sets traps because we do not trust in ourselves, because we do not love ourselves, therefore we do not respect ourselves, therefore we don't promote the higher potentials of the soul. And then we have the need, in an egocentric way, in a personalistic state of mind, to set traps, which in reality, deep down, in the long journey of evolution, sooner or later we will find out, oh my God, all the traps that I'm setting for others, the one who falls into, for sure, is myself. That is a great illusion, which I will be expanding more insecurity, more my low self-esteem, more my lack of trust in myself, and more potentializing my own negative belief systems, which are unrealistic, they are irrational. So it's important to, on daily basis, is still for us as members of humanity, it's very important that we learn, and for us who are now in the adult chronological age, it's important to invest in that, because now it's down to us to educate ourselves, to find time on daily basis that we can look within ourselves, to learn to reflect about ourselves. It's almost like having time for ourselves, psychically speaking, not just doing, and I don't even know what I'm thinking, yet I'm thinking in that state. So it's fundamental that we observe our thinking. That way we will become more aware of our shortcomings. In a loving way, we will allow ourselves in the next moment to think in a healthier way. We have the option to learn to change our thoughts. And if we don't know, we talk with someone. We also, it's very important when we can join study groups, which helps us to learn with each other, to think in a healthier way. And also we learn to control ourselves instead of wanting to control other people, that what we speak, our words are the extension of our thoughts and emotions. And also on the action level, we choose more and more to act in a responsible way. There is no way that we free ourselves from envy unless we develop high self-esteem. And high self-esteem is nothing to do for me doing what I want. That is an illusion. That is the one is still dominated by pride, selfishness, rebelliousness, and so on and so forth. once I understand a bit more the deep psychology as Joana de Angelis is teaching humanity, then I will realize that everything what we think, what we say, what we do is impacting our own movement within the law of cause and effect. This is why if I keep on projecting my own limitations on others, envy is my own inner insecurity, my own way that I abandoned myself throughout centuries. I didn't pay attention to myself, partially because the education system in the past didn't help either. But in the present, we have plenty of information available that helps us to discover ourselves and also discover the roots of envy, low self-esteem, inferior complex, lack of self-worth, merely because deep down, we still prefer to be identified with selfishness and pride. So we need to choose freely to understand that, ask help if you don't know, and also be willing to put the effort into to take the responsibility for what we think, feel, and do in the universe. Where we are, within our homes, within our colleagues, within our families, within members in society, where we are, self-awareness is the proposal that the universe is presented to every and each one of us in order for us to rescuing us. And as we carry on here, we learn a bit further to reflect. It's still in the book, Happy Life. And Joana de Angelis, again, is helping us in our self-development process. And I quote, countless crimes originate in envy, not to mention those that never come to be achieved. That is important because through envy, when we study this subject in a deeper level, understanding the human psyche, we will understand that a lot of crimes, as Joana says, and is right, happen because of our envy process. Through, again, envy translated in low self-esteem, inferior complex, and hatred, and insecurity, and fear, all the shadows that we carry within our unconscious minds. And then we follow others, then we hate, then we kill each other, which is a great illusion within the theory of reincarnation, because in reality, no one dies. The physical body, sooner or later, in a natural way, in one way or another, we will free ourselves from. But we as immortal beings will carry on alive. Therefore, any one of us who think that I will kill someone is an illusion. No one will be killed. Everyone will be carried on. But if I act in that crime, I'm hurting myself and increasing my low self-esteem and avoiding at that moment, instead of killing, to be in favor of life, to be willing to forgive, to be willing to be tolerant, to be willing to promote myself through the experiences. I repeat again, ourselves and all of those who may be with us. Killing someone or thinking to do that is the greatest illusion by the soul who is in their own shadows, is covered with their own shadows. Because as more as we enlighten our own shadows, we will sooner or later discover that actually death does not exist as materialism presented us. Death is a natural process on the physical biological level, but the soul is indestructible and carries on alive and carries on evolving, which is something very consoling and hopeful for all of us. And then Joana de Angelis carries on, is still in the book Happy Life. I like that title. And she says, I quote, envy is inferiority that must be corrected and transformed into companionship and fulfillment. You see how she is helping us in these brief reflections to enlighten our own minds, to enlighten our own hearts, so that we have new resources, how to override our old memories that we may still bring within the perispirit or the unconscious mind. Envy is inferiority. This is why since the beginning I'm referring for us to really become aware of it so that we can heal those limitations within ourselves. If I envy someone, I'm always relating with my own inferiority, with my own insecurity, with my own low self-esteem, which I haven't promoted yet. And the only way that we can overcome this shortcoming, this inferiority, it is to learn to take the responsibility and make the effort, whatever is needed according to every individual, to promote myself now within the new habits, the new potentials of the soul, the new ways of thinking. Each time when the envy comes up, let's dialogue with that aspect of ourselves and say, well, so far it was okay, now it's not okay anymore, because now I do have a deep understanding, I do have new resources which I choose to validate, which is self-respect, self-love. Each time when the tendency is to go to check and supervise other people's behaviors and telephones, this obsession, which these days is crazy, because we are disconnected from ourselves. It's almost like we are empty beings within. It's almost like we don't have a purpose in life that supports and sustains our soul, that nourishes it, that heals it, that promotes us. So in case we observe that, let's do the training, the practice, put the effort into on daily basis. Bear in mind, as I mentioned previously, the start point is our mental state, our thoughts, our belief systems. If you don't know how to do that alone, let's engage with someone who knows how to help us. But it's very important also that we engage in study groups, because together as a group, we can also, two minds, let's say, can think better than one sometimes. And it's helpful, temporary, for us to also develop our own internal autonomy. Fulfillment, because as more as we nourish our own inner lacks of self-love, surely we are feeling more fulfilled, because we are promoting high self-esteem through self-respect, through self-responsibility, through self-love. Self-love is the ability to take the responsibility within myself, to look within my own shadows and take them, have ownership, and also to transform them, and not be in this manipulative position that usually envy, meaning inferior complex, lack of self-worth, inferior, low self-esteem, based on negative belief system, we can be quite manipulative, which is an illusion of the spirit who does not take the responsibility to put the effort into to promote within the virtuous elements of the soul. We bring the seeds within, but the effort corresponds to each initiative from each soul. And when we carry on here further to learn a bit more, now I bring still the reference of Joana de Angelis, but now in the book Conscious Being. And she says, I quote, envy is moral weakness. Instead of striving for self-valuation, self-worth, the envious person laments the success of others and does not fight for their own. They compete through the rearing of intrigue and malicious gossip. They await the failure of their opponent, in which they take pleasure. They observe and pursue. Can you see here, my friends, that she is really referring to our own inner shortcomings and showing us that envy is a moral weakness, which is because our inferiority or our inferior aspects or our shortcomings or our shadows, different words meaning the same aspects within ourselves. As more as we are identified with them or by them, less we are willing to transform ourselves, because we are in a victim position. Victim position is a very strong position for those who are eluded, for the weak souls. I say it again. Victim position is a very strong position for the weak souls who do not take advantage of the moment that has been granted by God for us to address our own history of evolution and take the responsibility, which is self-autonomy, to learn to think in a different way, put effort into to re-educate ourselves. The resources are available plenty on earth. The main process is, or the main challenge is, are we willing to embrace it? Because that means to override our personal interests, manipulation, or shortcomings. Always the illusion of the ego, egocentric aspects that need to be perceived and freely, consciously choose to be restructured, re-educated. By whom? By ourselves individually. Because no one can act on our free will unless we choose to do that. Free will is the power that every soul brings within to change any aspects that identifies in any moment that is not suitable anymore in the healing process. As long as we choose to feel strong in the egocentric state of mind, we are eluded, we are ill-minded, and we carry on hurting ourselves instead of putting the effort into. If someone is ahead of me, is more intelligent, has more abilities, that is not by chance. That person puts effort into. That person is using the free will in a different way that I did. And I also can do. So when we look forward, those in front of us who are more advanced in any area, envy is the last thing that we want to really incorporate or validate or reinforce within ourselves. What we will do is to take the responsibility, the internal autonomy, put the effort into, and to educate ourselves this time, the values that promote ourselves, so that we diminish the tendencies of rebelliousness, of manipulation of people, situations outside us, and now try to control ourselves. The inner power needs to be stimulated by the will of the spirit. And that area, in that inner space, only us can choose to connect to and activate and stimulate that element, willpower, free will, responsibility to work together. All of that develops the internal autonomy, promoting high self-esteem, self-value, self-respect, self-love, confidence, security, all elements within ourselves, which all of us can choose gradually to develop with ourselves or with the help of somebody else, with the help of others when we are joining groups that also reflect about our own spirituality. Let's invest in it. We are capable of doing that. Sometimes we are exhausted with envy because it's really disturbing. And it can become very, very strong and hurting within ourselves. That may take sometimes centuries to heal ourselves. That is not be wise. We deserve better. We can do better in any moment as long as we, let's say, control or pride or selfishness or rebelliousness, that we, let's say, choose not to resist the flow of progress, not to resist the flow of our inner healing process. Let's start today. And in that way, we are coming to the end of these reflections. I hope to see you soon, and I do wish you much peace. Take care.